The hybrid rack. This is a combination rack that contains both the DC and communication equipment. Here are a couple examples of the hybrid rack. Some of you may refer to it as the LTE rack, since that is commonly the equipment found on the hybrid. A hybrid rack is designed to house both your DC equipment and your communication equipment. Your DC equipment will be located at the top of the rack. This can include your telec fuse panel, a power inverter converter, and the rate cap DC 6 or 12. Your communication equipment and cable management boxes will be located on the lower half of the rack. At the top of your rack will be located the producer bar for all your DC equipment. The only thing that should be grounded to this ground bar is your DC producing equipment, such as your rate cap or your converter inverter. Even the GPS OVP can be grounded to this ground bar or attached directly to the rack. The home run lead of the producer ground bar should be routed back to the main ground bar of the shelter and landed to the producer side of that ground bar. The producer ground bar can be attached directly to the hybrid rack. All the DC equipment can be attached to the rack as well. If it happens to be isolated, that's okay also. The isolation bar is located at the bottom of the rack. The only thing that can be grounded to the isolation ground bar is your communication equipment and your fiber management trays and other cable management trays. The isolation ground bar must be isolated from the hybrid rack. Isolation of the ground bar is achieved by the thin isolation pad seen pointed out here by the arrow. Notice also the plastic washers pointed out in this photo. They are required for the isolation as well. In addition to the isolation ground bar, all the communication equipment and cable management trays must be isolated from the rack as well. This too is achieved with the thin isolation pad and the plastic washers. Finally, the hybrid rack does not need to be placed upon an isolation pad. If it happens to have an isolation pad underneath of it, that is fine, but it is not a requirement for a hybrid combination rack. And that is your basic setup to a hybrid rack. Okay, let's do a recap on the hybrid rack. You have your producer bar located at the top of the rack. Directly beneath that will be your DC equipment. The DC equipment will occupy the upper half of the rack, starting at the top of the rack and working its way down as future carriers are installed. Near the bottom of the rack is your RF equipment. There should be a distinct gap between your DC equipment and your RF equipment. This allows for future expansion as other carriers are added. At the very bottom of the rack is where you'll find your isolation bar. The producer bar can be attached directly to the rack, as well as all the DC equipment. The DC equipment in turn gets grounded to the producer bar, and then a home run lead goes from the producer bar to the producer side of the main ground bar. The isolation bar must be mounted on isolation pads, as well as all the RF equipment. All the RF equipment gets grounded to the isolation bar. Then the isolation bar has a ground lead that goes back to the isolation side of the main ground bar. The FIF rack itself, as a hybrid rack, does not need to be isolated from the floor. That is the simple version of the hybrid rack. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to contact one of us at the Quality Assurance Leadership Team. We will be glad to help you. Remember to always stay 100% tied off. It's not just a company policy. Gravity never takes a break. I hope you learned something today, and thank you for watching.